Christmas at Red Butte by L.M. Montgomery. Part 1. "Of course Santa Claus will come," said Jimmy Martin confidently. Jimmy was 10, and at 10, it is easy to be confident. "Why, he's got to come, because it is Christmas Eve, and he always has come. You know that, twins." Yes, the twins knew it, and, cheered by Jimmy's superior wisdom, their doubts passed away. There had been one terrible moment when Theodora had sighed and told them they mustn't be too much disappointed if Santa Claus did not come this year, because the crops had been poor, and he mightn't have had enough presents to go around. "That doesn't make any difference to Santa Claus," scoffed Jimmy. "You know as well as I do, Theodora Prentice, that Santa Claus is rich whether the crops fail or not. They failed 3 years ago, before Father died, but Santa Claus came all the same. Probably you don't remember it, twins, 'cause you were too little, but I do. Of course he'll come, so don't you worry a mite. And he'll bring my skates and your dolls. He knows we're expecting them, Theodora, 'cause we wrote him a letter last week and threw it up the chimney. And there'll be candy and nuts, of course, and Mother's gone to town to buy a turkey. I tell you, we're going to have a ripping Christmas." "Well, don't use such slangy words about it, Jimmy boy," sighed Theodora. She couldn't bear to dampen their hopes any further. And perhaps Aunt Elizabeth might manage it if the colt sold well. But Theodora had her painful doubts, and she sighed again as she looked out of the window far down the trail that wound across the prairie, red-lighted by the declining sun of the short wintry afternoon. "Do people always sigh like that when they get to be 16? Asked Jimmy curiously. "You didn't sigh like that when you were only 15, Theodora. I wish you wouldn't. It makes me feel funny, and it's not a nice kind of funniness either." "It's a bad habit I've got into lately," said Theodora, trying to laugh. "Old folks are dull sometimes, you know, Jimmy boy." 16 is awful old, isn't it?" said Jimmy reflectively. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do when I'm 16, Theodora. I'm going to pay off the mortgage and buy Mother a silk dress and a piano for the twins." "Won't that be elegant? I'll be able to do that because I'm a man. Of course, if I was only a girl, I couldn't." "I hope you'll be a good, kind, brave man and a real help to your mother," said Theodora softly, sitting down before the cozy fire and lifting the fat little twins into her lap. "Oh, I'll be good to her, never you fear," assured Jimmy, squatting comfortably down on the little fur rug before the stove, the skin of the coyote his father had killed 4 years ago. "I believe in being good to your mother when you've only got the one. Now, tell us a story, Theodora, a real jolly story, you know, with lots of fighting in it. Only please don't kill anybody. I like to hear about fighting, but I like to have all the people come out alive." Theodora laughed and began a story about the Riel Rebellion of '85, a story which had the double merit of being true and exciting at the same time. It was quite dark when she finished, and the twins were nodding, but Jimmy's eyes were wide open and sparkling. "That was great," he said, drawing a long breath. "Tell us another." "No, it's bedtime for you all," said Theodora firmly. "One story at a time is my rule, you know." End of part 1. So, what do we know so far? We know it's Christmas Eve, and these kids, like all kids, are wondering if Santa will bring gifts. So far, we've got 3 major players: Theodora Prentice, age 16, Jimmy Martin, age 10, and the twins who are younger. We're assuming that they're toddlers. They both fit in Theodora's lap. The twins are kind of like a single entity in this story. And doubt has entered into their minds in the form of Theodora's sighs. Theodora is sighing like a grown-up because she's worried that Christmas morning won't live up to the children's hopes. The crops were bad this year, and Theodora is old enough to know what that means. Now, at 16, Theodora is pretty much an adult. At 16, Anne Shirley, Montgomery's most famous heroine, took the job as teacher at Avonlea School. So 16 was a time of more adult responsibility in this era than it is today. But Jimmy is full of confidence that it will turn out well. And when I hear him talk, there's a nostalgia that I feel. He believes that there's this cosmic, beneficent force in the form of Santa Claus that will bestow good upon him and his family no matter how bad the crop. It's a childlike faith. And the story is kind of asking us, is this something that we should foster and preserve? Is it a beautiful thing? Or is it a naive thing that he's eventually going to outgrow when he's disappointed? So another thing we know is that this is a one-parent household. Their father died 4 years ago. Now, whose father? Well, we do know that Jimmy and the twins are the kids of Aunt Elizabeth. Aunt Elizabeth Martin. Theodora has a different last name, Theodora Prentice, and she calls her Aunt Elizabeth. So Jimmy and the twins are full-blooded siblings. Theodora is a cousin. So that's all we know at this point. In this segment, though, L.M. Montgomery seems to be juxtaposing reality versus fantasy. So there's this reality that the crops were bad. There might not be any Christmas presents. And then there's the fantasy. Well, Santa Claus will bring everything that we want. So is this the same thing as doubt versus hope? We're not sure at this point. And I think it's interesting that Jimmy wants a story that fulfills his exacting wishes. Lots of conflict, lots of fighting, but everyone lives, so it all turns out okay. Now, is this story, Christmas at Red Butte, is it going to be like that? Or is it going to be a story of reality and disappointment? So Theodora, instead of telling him kind of like this fantasy story that he wants, chooses to tell them a true story about the Riel Rebellion, which was an actual Native American uprising against Canadian settlers. And she chooses this instead of what you might expect her to choose, which is like some type of Christmassy fantasy with sugar plums dancing and nutcrackers and Santa Claus. So we're not sure. Is this because she doesn't want to feed their hopes further? Get their hopes up about this Christmas that might not happen? So that is what we know so far. What are we curious about? Well, what am I curious about? I want to know if it's all going to turn out okay. Will the kids' belief and hope get crushed? Will it survive? Will the colt sell well enough to buy presents? So, where do we think the story is headed? Best case, dream come true. Aunt Elizabeth, Mother Martin, gets a great price for the colt and comes home laden with Christmas goodies. So that is like our fantasy scenario. And even though this is the best outcome for the little family, it's actually the least interesting option for us as readers, from our perspective. Because if this happens, the story ends and that's it. And there's something that we kind of instinctively know as readers, that this probably isn't going to happen. What's more likely is Mother Martin doesn't get the money she needs to give the kids the jolly Christmas that they're hoping for. So we just kind of instinctively know that this is probably going to happen because it'll lead to an escalation of events. Because if there isn't going to be enough money for Christmas, then what? So I will see you tomorrow for part 2 of Christmas at Red Butte by L.M. Montgomery.